I'm Dr. Chris Raynor, and these are some of the internet's gnarliest street skating fails. Buckle up.
Listen up, everybody. I have some news.
Hey interns, I'm Dr. Chris Raynor, and I am not your everyday ortho. Today, we have a few patients that present after having injured themselves while performing tricks when street skating. I will warn you that some of these are quite shocking, so if you are concerned about seeing injuries happen, you may want to watch one of my other videos, like what happened to Simone Biles at the Olympics. But if that doesn't bother you, stick around while I review some gnarly street skating fails.
Okay.
Street skating is a form of rollerblading where inline skaters perform tricks utilizing features that are present in their surrounding environment. Handrails, concrete ledges, stairs, ramps, and embankments are all fair game and are readily adopted as challenging obstacles to traverse. As creativity is an important part of street skating, pulling off a trick with appropriate style and flair is an integral part of this activity. Generally speaking, safety equipment does not increase style points, and it is not frequently found when skaters are performing tricks. Consequently, there are plenty of opportunities for injuries to occur.
I love you, buddy.
Ah,
Kid.
damn. Jeez, man. To be honest, I'm surprised that they don't happen more often than they do, but I suppose that I should be happy because fixing these athletes after they have injured themselves could literally be an orthopedic surgeon's full-time job. Boom. Ah. Why would you jump where there is a fixed immovable object? Backing into a post at high velocity is a great way to injure your back. You could easily break ribs in the back of the chest wall, and a spinal injury is certainly a possibility. Here, it is more likely that you will injure a vertebral spine than the vertebral body itself as a result of the impact against the pole or the exaggerated spinal extension. An extension fracture of the vertebral body itself is also possible. In rare circumstances, this injury could result in paraplegia or paralysis of the lower extremities below the level of the injury. In addition, if you look at the way that he struck the pole and then fell to the ground, you can see that his right arm is externally rotated when he falls. This is a great way to anteriorly dislocate your shoulder, or to dislocate your shoulder out the front. We don't have a chance to see his right arm as the skater is placed onto the stretcher, but this is another injury that we might want to consider here.
Try to kill it.
Boom. Oh my God. A facial smash onto the pavement is a great opportunity for a whole heap of injuries. Let's start with the upper extremities. Obviously, when you are falling to the ground, it is a natural reaction to want to save yourself. You put out your hand or your hands to prevent your face from hitting the ground. This mechanism of injury is called a fouche injury, or a fall on outstretched hand injury. It commonly results in fractures of the wrist at the end of the radius, one of the two bones of the forearm. Because of the direction of force at the time of the impact, a distal radius fracture is typically associated with a dinner fork deformity, where the wrist is bent backwards at the point of impact. If the skater is lucky, the fracture will only involve the radius and it will be minimally displaced. This is readily refixed with a reduction of the fracture under sedation or local anesthesia, and then stabilization for 6 to 8 weeks in a cast. If they are unlucky, however, then the fracture will involve both the radius and the ulna, and it will be significantly displaced. Fixation will be achieved with surgical stabilization using a plate and screws and the protection of a cast for 6 to 8 weeks. But that is just the wrist. Obviously, smacking the ground from an elevated height with your face is not ideal. But this is what will happen if your hands and arms crumple up like tissue paper when you hit the ground. Since you are striking with your face first, it will be your face that will bear the brunt of the impact. This can cause facial fractures and fractures of the jaw and the dentition. This just means that your grill can get jacked all the way up. Stabilization of these injuries might include simple wiring of your jaw for 6 to 8 weeks, or it may include open reduction and internal fixation with titanium plate. Unfortunate individuals may have permanent facial numbness, facial paralysis, or even visual disturbances. And don't forget the nose, because that is getting flattened as well. At least that can usually be popped into place under sedation. Fortunately, in this case, the skater landed relatively horizontal instead of with his body angled towards the ground. This decreased the chance of him landing directly onto his head and suffering an injury to his cervical spine.
My sweetest resting.
It literally makes my head hurt watching it. Here we have a skater, again falling from a height, but this time falling backwards. His momentum causes his head to literally bounce off the pavement like a basketball. That is definitely going to leave a mark. With an impact that is caused by a whipping motion, there is the real possibility of a skull fracture at the back of the skull or the occiput. This could be an isolated injury, but more than likely it would be associated with a closed head injury as well. This could simply be a concussion that would be caused by the impact of the brain on the back of the skull. Or, if more serious, could be a brain contusion. If the damage was even more severe, it might occur with bleeding inside or around the outside of the brain. These different kinds of bleeds could cause increased pressure within the skull and consequent compression of the brain. With enough pressure on the brain over a long enough period, permanent brain damage or even death could occur. Either way, he's not going to remember any of what happened, as he is more than likely to have amnesia surrounding the time of the injury. If his amnesia extends before the period of injury, this is called retrograde amnesia. If it occurs in the period following the injury, it is called anterograde amnesia. To be honest, given the fact that a person can fall from a standing height and die after striking their head, I find it amazing that these skaters were not injured more seriously. And of course, with the rapid extension of the cervical spine and the just as rapid stop when the skull bounces off the ground, there is also the possibility of a cervical spine injury as well. Although the injury mechanism involves both extension and flexion, I would anticipate here the cervical injury would be a flexion type of injury, largely because the extension was limited to neutral by the pavement. Oh, yeah, you did. You did. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, that's open. Now, this is a bit of a strange one. As the skater falls from the rail, he attempts to use his left arm to control his fall to the ground. His arm slides along the rail as he falls forward. And as he reaches the end of the rail, his left arm slips into the closed loop created by the handrail and the concrete wall. His momentum carries him forward despite his trapped arm. He continues to fall while the arm temporarily remains trapped until finally the arm, in true helicopter fashion, is wrenched free from the handrail. It appears that the skater suffers a both bones forearm fracture at the middle of the forearm because it looks like he has a new elbow between his original elbow and his wrist. This type of injury would involve both bones of the forearm, the radius, and the ulna. Given the propeller swirl injury mechanism, it might also be that he suffered both blood vessel and nerve injuries as well, since the forearm would have been bent and twisted at the same time. And if you look closely at the video, and in particular the blood that starts to pool on the pavement afterwards, we know that this injury is open, with the bones having perforated the skin from the inside as the fracture occurred. An open fracture is more severe than would be a comparable closed fracture, because of the added risk of infection. That's gonna hurt. Yeah. That's just not fun. This next injury mechanism is more along the lines of what I would expect to see when street skating. As you fall, you stick your arms out, as I have said before. Sometimes this is behind yourself if you are falling backwards. And if you can't see the ground behind you as you fall, you might land with your arms in weird positions. Here, the skater lands on his right elbow after falling from a height of approximately 8 feet. Fortunately, he lands with his forearm parallel to the ground, so his forearm looks okay. But from what I can make out here, his right elbow and shoulder are not going to be so hot. It's hard to tell here, but either one could be dislocated. Not to mention landing on your hip from a substantial height is not exactly pleasant. It is possible that this fall would cause the proximal femur to punch into the pelvis, causing an acetabular fracture. And this just means that the top of the hip is going to punch into the pelvis, breaking the bone inside. If there was no fracture, there would at the very least be a significant contusion or bone bruise on the side of the hip. Oh my God. Talk about getting punched in the face. Oh, Lord. Sometimes skaters have a penchant for self-harm and they just feel like smacking themselves in the face. So much so that they come up with very creative ways in which to do so. Like this guy, for example. He decides to skate down a railing with the intention, I believe, of jumping the gap at the bottom. However, he appears to lose his footing just before takeoff and he doesn't get the launch that he was hoping for. Unfortunately, this leaves him launching at full speed directly into the top corner of the opposite wall, which he strikes with his chin. This is a fantastic opportunity for a jaw or mandible fracture. If he strikes with enough speed, there is also a possibility that he might strike the corner of the wall with his clavicle or his neck itself. A clavicle fracture could result from the contact, as could a tracheal injury should his neck be the point of contact. Now, it takes a reasonable amount of skill to hit your chin on the corner of the wall, but to be honest, it's a rather large target. It is way more impressive if you can do this with a much smaller target. Say like the end of a handrail, like this guy. Now, this is a challenging task and he isn't 100% successful. If you look at the slow motion replay, we can see that he doesn't directly hit the chin, but rather the right side of the jaw, between the angle and the hinge. And alas, if we look at the slow-mo after he has struck the handrail, we can see that his jaw appears to be shifted to the left with a prominence in the middle of the jaw. This would suggest that he suffered a fracture dislocation of his jaw. That's gonna hurt and it's gonna require operative fixation of his jaw with contoured plates and screws. It may also require drinking a lot of smoothies for the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Disappear.
Now this one is particularly unpleasant, and that is not to say that the other injuries so far haven't been painful, but this one makes everyone with a Y chromosome cringe. Here the skater attempts to jump into a rail grind while skating backwards. He misses the rail and falls down to the inside of the rail with his legs split apart. As he falls, he attempts to keep his torso upright by reaching back to the railing. His right leg becomes trapped between the ramp and the support post for the railing, and though his right leg has come to a stop, his body keeps moving with the momentum. Yeah, until the trapped right leg forces him to a sudden stop. Unfortunately, he probably ripped his tight jeans in the process, as well as everything else between his legs. With the sudden James Brown splits moment, we can expect that his groin and hamstring muscles have been stretched to their capacity. We could expect a strain of these muscles with possibly even a tear of the muscles in either the body, at the musculotendinous junction, or at the insertion of the muscles on the bone. With the forced internal rotation of the right hip, while the body and the leading leg rotate the other way, there is a real opportunity for a fracture of the right femur at the femoral neck or at the shaft of the femur. If you want to know why that is, you can check out my video on Josh Naylor where I discuss this in more detail. But whatever the injury that he has suffered, he will certainly be singing in a
higher range after this fall.
Oh! Yeah. As I mentioned at the start, street skating is all about creativity and style. And so whatever one skater can do well, another skater can do better, or at least try to do better. Not to be outdone by the last skater with the trapped leg, this skater takes the leg trap splits thing to the next level. This skater tries to grind a rail beside a brick wall. Although there is only a few inches between the wall and the railing, the skater manages to somehow trap his skate in this space as he slips to the outside of the rail. Just as with the last clip, the skater has his rear leg trapped by the railing and he falls into the splits. Easy stuff. But since he is looking to add his own flair to things, he falls in such a way that his skate gets trapped where it can't rotate with the body. The skater continues to fall, but the skate remains in the same position. Eventually, his body falls below the level of the trapped skate. With the skate unable to rotate, the bone of his lower leg starts to bend over the top of the rigid skate boot. So while bones might suck in rotation, they are only marginally better when bent. In short order, the tibia and fibula cry uncle and the skater develops a new knee at the top of his skate boot. Giddy up. Hopefully, this is a closed injury and does not involve the bone coming out through the skin. But either way, both bones will be involved and will be affected by transverse fractures directly across their shafts. Stabilization will require intramedullary fixation of the tibial shaft and plate fixation of the fibula. Looks like my guy won't be street skating for an extended period. So if this is an activity that you're gonna do, here are 4 tips to keep yourself safe when street skating. Number 1, for the love of God, use a freaking spotter. Since street skaters use structural features as obstacles, someone should always be watching to make sure there are no pedestrians, cyclists, or even vehicles rolling by the anticipated landing area that might get crushed by or crush the skater as he or she lands on the ground. Number 2, yeah, I know it's not cool, but you might want to consider a helmet. It may not look sexy, but if you can't remember the jump that you almost landed because you squished your watermelon, did it even really happen? Number 3, you might also want to consider knee pads. Yes, they are protection, but you can wear them under your pants so that no one can see them. And it is way better landing on your knees, shredding your pants, than it is to land on your wrists and turn your forearms into dinner utensils. Torn pants are fashionable. Dinner fork forearms just look weird. Number 4, if you're gonna slide rails, pick rails that are solid, where you aren't going to get your leg or arm trapped by the railing. There are easier ways to get to the high notes, and it isn't exactly stylish to have people see you screaming in falsetto like a 10-year-old choir boy. Thanks for watching. I will see you for rounds next week. And as always, that's been a word from Dr. Chris, not your everyday ortho.
That's not extreme, that's stupid.
It's his lifestyle. It's true.
Lifestyle was living, man. Okay?
That's almost dying, right?
Live it.